Foldable phone hype has been steadily building up over the last year and a half, but I don't think even Motorola could have predicted how excited people would get over its updated Razr. Early on, it seemed like nearly everyone had something good to say about this thing, but that started to change once people actually started spending time with it. There is a pretty good chance the new Razr just isn't for you, so I have devised what I think is a pretty clever litmus test. If you're even considering buying one of these things, just take a moment and think about how this following statement makes you feel. In terms of performance and experience, this thing is a $400 smartphone in a $1,500 smartphone body. If you sort of naturally recoiled at the absurdity of that idea, well, your choice is pretty easy. You do not need a Motorola Razr. Godspeed, have a good day, all that. If that wasn't enough to turn you off, well, you just might enjoy this thing after all. I mean, I did, for a while at least. Let's dive in. We need to start with the Razr's design because as complex and as compromised as it is, it's perhaps the single biggest thing this phone has going for it. Motorola swears up and down that it never specifically set out to recreate the Razr. Instead, people actually wanted this kind of design. They weren't wrong. A device like the Galaxy Fold is a great choice for people who want the flexibility that a small tablet offers, but not everyone wants to use a small tablet. I am a strong believer in the concept Motorola embraced here. The Razr is a full-size smartphone with a 6.2-inch screen that just happens to fold down comfortably to fit in even the snuggest of pockets. That's not to say this design isn't controversial though. For one, not everyone is a fan of the Razr's chin, and in fairness, it's not just a retro design decision. It houses a decently fast fingerprint sensor and the phone's pretty good but not spectacular main speaker, and all told, I don't mind it much because if nothing else, it prevents me from having to stretch my thumb all the way down to hit those Android navigation keys. On the other hand, this chin is flanked by some pretty hard edges, which sometimes makes the Razr uncomfortable when you're trying to hold it taking pictures. The super slim volume and power keys on the Razr side are really hard to use too, and believe me, you're gonna mix them up a lot. You've probably also heard people talking about the quiet creaking noise the Razr makes when you open and close it, and honestly, it's only really noticeable when you're somewhere quiet. I believe Motorola when it says this is a perfectly natural consequence of using such a complicated hinge design. I mean, just look at this thing. Motorola says it went through no less than 26 iterations trying to get everything working just right. The mechanism here actually physically moves the bottom of the screen into the Razr's chin, which is kind of wild. That said, it is not great to hear what sounds like a covert fart coming out of a $1,500 phone, but let's be honest, there are bigger things to be concerned about here. Case in point, the screen. Like I said earlier, Motorola used a 6.2-inch plastic OLED panel, and at first glance, it's not half bad. The colors are surprisingly vivid out of the box, and viewing angles are pretty good too. That said, the 21:9 display only runs at 876 by 2142, so it is definitely not the crispest screen you'll ever see. Thankfully, that sounds worse than it actually looks in person. I'll be honest, this low resolution didn't bother me much, to the point where I kind of forgot that it wasn't running at full HD anyway when you're holding the phone at regular distance. And speaking of things I just didn't notice after a while, there are two sort of subtle creases above and below the hinge, and you're more likely to feel them than see them most of the time, but they're not really a big deal, they just feel strange. I have other concerns though. Sometimes my Razr screen takes on a splotchy, almost oily look. For some reason, it's especially apparent under really bright fluorescent light. It in no way impacts the screen's usability, it just looks bad. The Razr screen also feels noticeably plasticky, which is going to take some getting used to for anyone used to modern glass-covered displays. More concerning to me is that even though the internal screen sits mostly flush with the bezels around it, this panel is just a little bit raised on the left side, which in my case means that I can feel the plastic OLED physically moving under my finger every time I tap something near the hinge. Could this somehow impact the screen's usability over time? Yeah, maybe, who knows? Long-term durability is another crucial issue that we just can't get a feel for right now, but I can speak to a few things. I've accidentally dropped the phone face down a few times, and the screen still seems fine. It survived a windy day trip to the beach too. The sand was whipping around like crazy, but none of it seemed to bother the Razr very much. I was still pretty worried every time I closed the phone though, because when you do, the screen directly above the hinge lifts up off the Razr's body, so stuff could feasibly find its way inside. This gap is only ever open for a split second, so it's probably not an issue, but do you really want to bank on probably? Maybe that's why Motorola gave the Razr an external 2.7-inch screen to help you get things done without having to open the phone all the time. You can use it to quickly triage incoming notifications and frame up selfies, but getting more than that done usually takes more effort than it should. You can set up to 6 shortcuts to appear on the screen, so it's pretty easy to toggle Wi-Fi or launch the camera or fiddle with the brightness, but before you get to any of that stuff, you have to swipe to unlock the screen, and that almost always takes a few tries. The thing to keep in mind is that despite Motorola's good intentions, the things you're able to do from the main screen often feel so limiting that you'll be opening the phone all the time anyway. At least the Razr is nice enough to launch the corresponding app on that main screen if you've been fiddling with it on the outside one. Now, I know all of this sounds pretty rough, but you can find comfort in one thing. The Razr actually runs pretty well. It's still a long way off from flagship performance, I grant you, but the Snapdragon 710 chipset and 6 gigs of RAM keep everything moving at a pretty decent clip. Motorola's clean software stays out of the way well enough here too, but I have to point out that this is a $1,500 smartphone launching in 2020 without the latest version of Android on board. I would normally be pretty salty about that, but at this point it's among the least of my issues with the Razr. Anyway, yeah, performance. You'll notice some light stuttering when you're playing some more demanding games, but when it comes to standard daily use, I never really felt like I was being shortchanged. That is, until I started using these cameras. I think it's fair to say that the Razr is a fashion-forward smartphone, but I don't think even the most vapid-style guru would be thrilled by the photos this thing takes. Now, that is not to say that the 16-megapixel main camera with its f1.7 aperture and dual-pixel autofocus is bad. I've actually taken a handful of photos that came out pretty nicely, and I threw some of them into our Galaxy Unpacked live blog this week. Still, if you're looking for crisp, richly detailed photos with even exposure across the board, you're better off buying literally any other premium smartphone. Oh, and what's that? You wanted to shoot in low light? Good luck, pal. Expect your results to be even softer and even less satisfying, with an extra dose of shutter delay for good measure, because it's super slow to focus in anything but ideal lighting. Night mode is a necessity in the dark, but even those photos don't look particularly good compared to the competition. I should also mention there is a front-facing camera above this screen too, and the best thing I can say about it is that it exists. I have to assume Motorola squeezed one in here mainly for video calls or something, because you'd be kidding yourself if you expected quality selfies out of this thing. That might be fine if you, like me, hate your face, but do yourself a favor and avoid this camera whenever possible. More than anything though, I was concerned about power management and battery life, and how could I not be? Just look at how thin this thing is when it's open. The best Motorola could do is squeeze in 2 slim separate batteries with a combined capacity of about 2,510 milliamp hours. I say about because according to at least one YouTube teardown, the actual battery capacity is closer to 2,400. That's still smaller than just about any other smartphone I have tested in recent memory. To my surprise though, the reality wasn't quite as bad as I expected, but it's still not great. If you play your cards right and aren't literally glued to your phone 24/7, the Razr could feasibly last about 12 hours. I've gotten pretty close a few times. If you are, on the other hand, the kind of person who just sort of plops on a couch and scrolls through Instagram for hours, you will be disappointed. The Razr's screen on time maxes out at around 4 hours tops, and it will get pretty hot before long. All of these factors made it really hard for me to wrap my head around the Razr. Hardly anything about it makes practical sense. But that also might be the point. The Razr feels tailor-made for people who crave style over pure functionality, and I have no doubt that there are plenty of people out there who fit that description. This is not a flagship, this is a fashion statement. I really feel for Motorola, because building a phone like this at a time like this is gutsy, and the last thing I would want is the team involved to get discouraged and never make another one again. Ultimately though, I think for people like you and me, the best thing we can do is respect the work that went into building the Razr and wait for something better. Whew, that was a lot. If you want to learn more about the Motorola Razr and how it stacks up to new competitors like the Galaxy Z Flip from Samsung, be sure to subscribe to Engadget, and as always, thanks for watching.